Hello guys and girls, welcome to a new Photoshop tutorial with PSDBox. Today I want to show you how I made this surreal manipulation in Photoshop. It's something that's not really difficult and I think it's pretty cool. Now for this tutorial I'm going to make it a little different. I'm not going to use the cage, but you will have the stock images of the cage if you want to do it like this. In the end I didn't really like how it looked. I think it looks kind of weird. Even too weird even for me. So for this tutorial, we'll make it without this cage. I will use Photoshop CC 2019 for this because it's the version that I have installed, but you can make it even in Photoshop CS6. Lower than Photoshop CS6, you will have some problems with some adjustments that are not available, like for example, the color lookup. You can find these resources, you can download them for free from my website. The link is on the video description. And that's all for the introduction. I hope you will enjoy it and let's get started. Let's start by making the background. You already know me, I guess. Most of you, I start all my manipulations the same way by creating the background first. See, the original size of this PSD file, which by the way is available only for my premium members, but I used 3000 by 4500. I'm going to use the same to create this, but I will make it smaller for the video because I'm also recording. So I'm just going to make it 2000 by 3000, and I'm also going to lower the resolution. By the way, I'm going to show you how to do that. Press Option Command I or Alt Control I, and if you want to lower the resolution, if you want to print this, you can leave it at 300, but it's going to make your computer run a little slower because there's more information there and the file size will be a little larger. So I'm going to uncheck Resample and just lower this to 72 and click OK, and that's it. Okay, and now when you check it back, you can see you have the same dimensions, but at a lower resolution. By the way, I created a video talking about the difference between the resolution and the size and how to prepare your artworks for print. I'm going to put a card here on the video or a link on the description if you want to check that out. And I'm going to press OK. So let's get rolling here. So we're going to start by creating the background using the sky image. Many of the images are from pexels.com. You can see on the name over there. And some of them I created myself, like for example this cages, and some of them are purchased, like this one's over here. And some others are my own pictures, like for example the portrait that we're going to use is a picture of mine because it was a lot easier for me to just take a picture of myself with my camera than just looking for a stock image. So we're going to start by using this image, which is the sky. So I'm going to just paste that over here on my canvas. Now I just wanted to have something there on the background really subtle. I didn't want to have like a really crazy background there. Let me just check more or less the height of that. So I need to put it a little higher. Anyways, I can move it around later. So let's name this sky. And next, we're going to add some birds around here, but we will do that after we add the portrait because we need to know where the portrait sits in order to be able to add the birds around there. So let's do that. Let's add the portrait first. On the stock folder, actually, if you open that raw file, this is a raw file, I'm going to include the JPEG version for the ones that don't have Camera Raw or they don't know how to use it or anything like that and just want to use the picture straight away. If you open this in Camera Raw by double clicking, well, it's going to open it in Photoshop in Camera Raw and it's going to have the edits already embedded, and that's because you also have this XMP file which contains all these adjustments here. So when you open it, if you want to make any adjustments you can do it, but I will leave this. These are the original adjustments that I made. This is going to open this as a smart object, or at least it should. Well, it's not, but anyways, I already have the edit, so I'm just going to copy it here. I will turn this into a smart object because I want to make it smaller, but I always say that when you want to create a layer mask for any object in Photoshop, it's better to do it on the big image, not so I mean create the layer mask and then make it smaller. In my case, now I did it the opposite way, so that's why I turned it first into a smart object, because now I can double click to reopen this on a new tab here and just get rid of the background, which is really simple. So I use the quick selection tool to make a really quick selection here, and I will create a layer mask. And I'll just really quickly refine it by choosing select and mask. I'm going to increase the feather just a little bit and the contrast, and I think we're good to go. I didn't mask the part over here because, well, actually I don't think it's going to be visible, so I'm just going to leave it like that. Press Ctrl S to save it. This will update my smart object. We can now add those birds around there, so let's place embedded, and here we'll have a few images. Well, actually, let's open them on a different document. So let's open, you have like several images. I'm just gonna use this too because they're a little easier to extract, and I don't want to spend too much time here because it's a repetitive task and it's really simple to do. So just select your bird. I will just add 2 more, this one, and that's it, because I don't want to have too many. You can see I have like 4 here. Now, let's blur them. I will not use the same amount of blur on all of them because these ones on the back will be blurred a little more, so I'm going to use a Gaussian blur, or actually let me use the fill blur because I like it better. Now, if you're happy with them and you want to save some space here, you can convert all 4 into a smart object. Convert the smart object, and now I have all my birds into a single layer. Now we can move on and now add the texture which I added here on top of this, because I wanted to create, you can see the sort of like a grungy effect with all of this scratches on the image. So let's do that. So I will add a new layer on top of the birds. So I will place that texture over there. So I place this on top of the birds and on top of the sky. And here we're going to have to use some curves. So I'm going to press Ctrl Command M and use an output of 94 and input 138 to just darken that a little bit. And I will also use the camera raw here just to add some vignette. So just make this a little darker on the sides with a smaller midpoint. And I will also increase a little the clarity to about 30 or something like that. You can see, just make this look a little more grungy. And I will also add 5 on the haze. And here on the split tone, I have 32, just to give it a touch of color. For the hue and saturation of 9. This will make it a little yellowish. So this is the result, and I will drop the opacity of this to 20%. One other thing that I forgot to do is here on the sky add some blur, because these birds are blurred and the background stands out too much. Make sure some of these mountains here just show up there on the back just a little bit, because it just adds a bit of depth to the image so that it's not looking that flat. So let me just rearrange this a little bit. I don't want to see the water, so just those mountains sticking out from there. And I will apply some blur here. I think I use like 3 pixels or something like that. Let me just zoom in and see how it looks like. Yeah, 3 is a little too little, so I'm going to add 5. Let's use 5 and click OK. Now, depending on the canvas size you're using, you might want to have something a little, use some higher values on the blur. Okay, let's move on, and now that we are still here on the portrait, let's add those cracks there on the body. So I'm going to press the Shift Command D, which is a custom adjustment, custom shortcut, which I use for the place embedded, which is this one over here. And I used this texture I purchased from Deposit Photos, and I'm just gonna make it a little bigger. Change the blend mode to multiply, and use the multiply blend mode. Now you see that the edges are not perfectly blended, so I will press Control Command M and just use this point to make this, or actually let's use levels for the ones of you who like to use levels. Basically, see the spike over here, you use the highlights to just make this stand out a little more. Well, actually, not stand out, but just get rid of those edges. See that? Before and after. And make the darks even darker for the darker parts here. And click OK. So that's those tracks. Okay, now we can move on and start adding some interesting stuff over here. Let's add the blindfold over here. So for that we have to open the image of the girl, which is this one. And extracting this is really easy, just using the quick selection tool. So let me just use the normal layer and start selecting it. And I will turn it into a smart object and make it small just to make it fit my face here. And on top of that, I have to now deal with the ears, and it's more complicated doing it if you do it in Photoshop than it actually is if you do it yourself before you take the image. So let's do that. I'm gonna place it right over there, I think, and I will create a layer mask for the portrait and just get rid of the ears. Actually, oops, use the brush tool. And now on the blindfold, I'm gonna press Control Command T, right click and choose Warp, and I will use the Warp tool to Now, the next thing I want to do is on this blindfold, I want to add an adjustment, and that's so go to Image Adjustments and use the shadows and highlights, because I want to, on the shadows, leave everything to 0, and on the highlights, increase this amount. But anyways, I'm going to click OK, and I will now desaturate this because I don't like those bluish tones there. And click OK. Now I have the blindfold on. Of course, we have to create the shadows. I didn't refine the edges, but you can do that if you want to. Let's move on and add the text over here, over this, and show you how I made this look like a little more like a bloody piece of cloth there. So I used the font which you have on the resources folder. I used the finger paint font. You have it here. You can install it. Or you can use also this one, doesn't look that bad either. So it's the finger paint regular. So let's add the text here. You can use any text you want, but since I called this trust and I wanted to like kind of represent that image of a blind trust, I thought the word trust would look nice. So let's search for the finger paint regular. So I use the word trust. You can modify this if you want. Actually, I will and change the blend mode to multiply. And now we can go back to the color because I want to have less saturation. You don't want to have something really red like this. It's not realistic. Dried blood is usually a lot darker and less saturated, something like this. Okay, and now I will rasterize this. I will right click and choose rasterize layer, rasterize type. And of course, now if you press Control Command T, you can use the warp and try to kind of distort it a little bit, or you can use a displacement filter if you know how to use it. Now I'm gonna do something that I think is going to give it a better look to it. First, I'm gonna duplicate the layer and hide the copy underneath, and on the one on top I will use the blend if, and I'm going to use the underlaying layer and just going to split this with the Alt key or Option on a Mac and do something like that. And this will create the effect that the blood is actually kind of infiltrated into the actual fabric there. And with this copy, I will blur it. I will go to Filter, Blur, and choose Gaussian Blur. Let's see the amount of blur that I could use for this. Maybe about 6 for this canvas size. Just have something sticking out from underneath. Something like that. Click OK. And now I'll change the blend mode. Let's see which one works. Maybe I'll use linear burn and do the same with the layer styles. I'm just going to do something like that. I think it looks a little better, and actually just remove that from there as well. So just kind of have something on the edges there sticking out. Okay, now we can go even further with this. Let's open another stock image, which is this one. This is actually, I think it's a piece of canvas or something. And what I did is I just copied parts like this. Control C, go back here, locate my blindfold, I create a new clipping mask on top and paste that texture over here and use the multiply blend mode. And you can create something like that. Now we have to use levels or curves to increase the light there. And actually do the same that we did with the text. Use the underlaying layer and split this like so. Now this is too big, I think, and I don't want to cover my text too much, so I will put it there on the side. Also, you can try copying, just instead of copying this big part over here, which is more intense, you can copy these parts over here like so and paste them there as a clipping mask on the blindfold. And just you want to just create some sort of dirt and something like a little more blood effect there on it. Now they're still here working with the blood and with this part over here on the portrait. Let's also add those dripping blood lines. I used this image. I think this is paint. So just copy some parts from here. And you have to place these ones underneath the blindfold and on top of the portrait and those cracks. So paste that there and use the multiply blend mode. I will have to make it smaller and just have something like that. So you will see that the edges, you can see, is not blending perfectly. So again, use levels and just use the right slider to move it a bit towards the left, and this will make the image a lot brighter and the white part will go away and you will only be left with the blood. And just position this however you want, something like that. And let me just add a couple more. And we're done with the blood. Now the next step I want to do is make the shadows here, because it's kind of looking weird, and I want to add the shadows underneath the blindfold, and then we will add those chains and the barbed wire. So what I did is I grouped everything just to have some organization. I added everything into its own group. And here on the blindfold, let's add the shadow first. There are several approaches to this. You can create a new layer on top of the portrait and paint the shadow manually, which is something I strongly recommend you do if you're good at painting. Well, it's actually not really that difficult, but anyways. And the second approach is to use the layer style. So locate the blindfold, double click, add a drop shadow, and use the settings that you like. And once you're done, once you're happy with your shadow, you have to turn this shadow into its own layer, because you want to be able to mask out parts that you don't need. So right click on the FX and choose create layer, and this will turn that drop shadow into its own layer. And now you can create a layer mask, and with the brush, so create a layer mask for that, and with the brush just get rid of the shadow around the sides. Of course you can go ahead and while actually enhance this shadow manually. If you think you want to add more, let me just set up my brush here. You can actually paint yourself some more shadow if you want to. Now, on the blindfold, I also want to add some inner shadow. So I'm going into the layer styles again and add inner shadow. Well, actually it looks pretty awesome, like it is. Yeah, I'm using this color. If you want to copy the value, something really dark, but not black, and something towards red. And then I use the multiply blend mode and increase the size to just soften the shadow and just kind of create a bit of vignette over there. One thing I don't like is this blood texture, the strong one. This one, it's too saturated. So I will press Control Command U, but I have to unlock it first. And just desaturate that a little bit. Okay, now it looks better. Okay, now let's add those chains over the mouth here. So that's really simple to do. Let me just close images that I don't need anymore. And here you have a few images. You have this one with a straight chain. Then you have this one, and also this one. I rendered this in Blender, so I will use this one first. So I'm gonna open it and paste it right over here. I will put it inside the portrait group, but you can organize this however you like. Create a layer mask, and with your brush, carefully paint out the parts that you don't need. Now that's the first chain. Let's add the second one, and I will use chain 3 as my second chain. Now, in order to make this look a little more realistic, we have to create some shadows. But before I do that, let me just add the lock there as well, and we will be done with that. So this is the lock. I rendered all of this in Blender myself. I downloaded this models, well, actually the chain I made it myself, but the lock I downloaded it from sketchfab.com. I mentioned this website in the past. I get most of the models from there and then just render them myself with the lighting that I want. So I put this lock in between the two chains so that you don't see the link there, because it's easier that way. That's in this lock. And let's create some shadows. I will use the same technique on the chains as I used for the blindfold, because here we have a lot of detail, and painting it manually, it's kind of painstaking and it's a lot easier. So I'm gonna go into chain 1, double click and add a drop shadow, but we need to use different settings here. I will uncheck use global light, increase the distance a little bit, also the opacity, now maybe 5 is okay. I think it would look a little more realistic if we actually use 2 drop shadows, one for the shadow that is just there on the edges, and then a softer shadow with a distance of about 10 and a higher size, maybe 14 or something like that, and increase a little bit that. Okay, now I will right click and choose create layers, and this will create 2 layers, one for each of those shadows. I will merge them. Well, actually no, because each one of them uses its own blend mode. The second one uses soft light and the first one uses multiply. And now create a layer mask for both of them. And here you can use the selection of the portrait itself. Control click it. This will load the portrait, and now I can go to the layer masks that I just created, invert the selection and paint out with a brush this shadow. Oops. Paint that shadow out, and the same, well, actually, yeah, on both layers, there and there. And let's do the same with the other chain, chain 2, double click, add the same drop shadow. Actually, you can see I have the same settings now as I have for the first one. The first one is on multiply with 2, 0, and 7. And the second one is on soft light with 10, 0, and 14. Obviously, these values depend on the canvas size that you have. Click create, right click on the effects, create layers. And now I'll create 2 layer masks for this. Let's do the same. Let's load the selection of the portrait. Control click. Because we only want the shadows to be visible over the portrait. Now, I have to invert the selection because right now I have this selected the inside of the portrait and I want the outside. So I'll go to select, inverse, or press Shift, Control I, or Shift or Command I on a Mac. And with the brush, get rid of the paint on both layer masks, and you can see how it goes away. And now we have the shadows only over the portrait. Now we still have to create some shadows over the chains themselves. So let's start with chain 2, create a new layer on top, and I will create it as a clipping mask. You can use inner shadows as well, but I think it's a lot better if you just paint the shadow yourself because you have more control. And I'm going to use a soft brush, the black color 50 and 20 for opacity and flow of the brush, and just paint, oops, where am I? At chain 2 on the top one. Okay, and just paint some shadow over here because on this side it should be darker. Okay, now we have the chains. Now the shadow here on the top one is not really that great. So I'm going to get rid of some of it because we have light hitting on this side. We don't need that much shadow. The same happens with the blindfold. You should not add too much shadow over here. But anyways, we can fix this a little on camera raw at the end. Now we have that. Let's create a shadow for the lock as well. So just use drop shadow here. I will use the soft light just to see how it looks like. And I will use a bigger size here. We just want a really soft shadow like that. And I think it looks good. I will add a gradient overlay because I want to darken this right side of the lock. And I will use the multiply blend mode for that. And of course I want to drop the opacity. Now the angle, you have to adjust it so that it darkens this part only, and use black to white, because if you use multiply, the white will go away and you will only have the black, which will be used to darken and create a gradient like that across the lock. So we've reached the part where we now have to add, I also use some barbed wire, and of course I also added that cage, but I actually didn't really like how it looked, that's why I will not do it here. But let's add the barbed wire. So let's open that stock image. I will use the magic wand with a tolerance of, let's see, 24, I think it works. I will uncheck contiguous and I have it on point sample. Click on the white area and this will select the background. Alt click the layer mask to create an inverted layer mask and get rid of the background. And just copy any of the parts you want, add it, copy, merge, and go here. And I will put this again inside the portrait group, paste it right over there, and I will make it a little smaller. Don't make it too small to fit your image because it's going to look too small. So you better cut parts of it. So we have to put it on top of the blindfold actually, because I want to cross it. So I don't want to be underneath it. I want to be on top of the blindfold inside the group. And let's name this wire 1 and just make it smaller but not too small. I think something like that would work. Just do something like this and press Control, well actually go to edit and choose Puppet Warp, and here you can warp this however you want, just give it a bit of a shape. I wanted to have this sort of a curved shape, but not that much. Something like that. Press enter, and now you can create a layer mask. The edges are here, I'm doing it really, not really that realistic, but creating the curvature here, it's kind of tricky. So you could use the puppet warp to wrap this like that, but I will not do it here. Well, actually, I'm going to try it on the second one. Let me just select another part from here to here. Like that. I will use the puppet warp again. Yeah, there you go. So you have to add an anchor point right there where the edge is, and then just wrap this around like that. Press enter. Now create the layer mask, and just like we did with the chains, get rid of the parts you don't need. Now this one looks like it's going actually behind the head there. Now the same here, we have to add some drop shadow. So just add a couple of simple drop shadows and probably darken this. Let me just use curves and see how it looks if I darken this. Yeah, just a little bit, not too much, so that they make enough contrast with the cloth there. And of course you can add even more around here if you want to, but I will leave it like that because I think it looks pretty good that way. Let's start adding some ambient, but before we do that, I want to make a few edits on the portrait itself. So I'm going to select it, and I want to desaturate this a little bit, like so. And you can create more ambient here by adding some feathers, which is what I did. So I'm going to create a new layer on top, and I will use this PNG feather. You have two of them. You can mask this one if you want, and just open that and place it over here. I will make it a little bigger and use some blur on it. I will use the fill blur because I like how it looks like. And let's see, the amount of blur, maybe 30 or something like that would work. And I have to lower the lightness on this a little because it was too white. You can also use colorize to give it a yellowish touch. So you can either make it darker like so or something brighter like that. I think I will leave it there. And just duplicate it and rotate it a little bit and add another one over there. But this one, I will make it a little darker with the hue saturation, like that. I think it looks a little better. And this one, I will move it here so that it makes a little contrast with the body. And this one makes some contrast with the sky there. Now, we're still not ready yet. Let's add some particles. Create a new layer, get the brush tool. And I use this dust. I will include this in on the resources folder. I created this myself on my previous tutorial called Balance, which is a premium tutorial where I talked about the entire workflow that I used to make my manipulations. And actually I use the same principle here. By the way, if you're interested, I'm going to add a card here on the video. And as I said, that's a premium video which you can watch here on YouTube if you want. And in case you're interested in my premium tutorials on YouTube, I want to just mention this. Becoming premium on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, does not give you access on my website. You have the same tutorials, but YouTube is a separate platform from my website. So it's just another alternative for people that just want to watch on YouTube or cannot pay using the payment system on my website. Okay, so with this brush, I just painted a few out of focus random dust here, there, and maybe there. And just let me just blur this a little bit, and then I'll paint some others. 15 is kind of too much. 7 is okay. And now just add a couple more around there, like so. Now, I will make the stamp for the final effect here. Well, actually, let me just add a new layer on top and put it on screen and add some glows of light. really subtle. Let me uncheck my transfer option here and just add a glow of light on lighten, actually not on screen, and just do something like that and something like that over there, and maybe another one over here, but with a darker tone, like that. Okay, and now let me make that stamp, create a new empty layer on top of everything, and press Shift Option Command E if you're on Mac, or Shift Alt Control E if you're on Windows. And I will turn this into a smart object and just go to the camera raw. Actually, we're going to use this twice. So filter, camera raw filter, and I just want to increase the clarity here, 17, and the dehaze 4, and I'll drop the vibrance to -15 or something like that, and add more vignette with the FX. Now, you can see that the whole image is kind of unsaturated. The only color that we have is here on the blood on the blindfold and some here on the tattoo, but that really doesn't count. So now it's really easy to just create any kind of color you want. Once you have everything pretty seamless in terms of color, it all has the same tone, you can very easily use any color palette that you want. And we're going to do that next. I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to start adding some colors. Now the first, I'm going to use color lookups. You will not have this color lookups because these are premium LUTs that I'm using. But just to show you what you can do, you can use other techniques like gradient maps, for example. And here I used one called Epic Ivory. Let me see if I can find it, Epic Ivory. And I have this on normal at 100%. You can see the effect that it creates. You can use curves to create this sort of reddish tone on the shadows. Then I have yet another one, another color lookup. And I'm going to include the links to these packs if you want to purchase them. But let me just find that one. It's called Instagram V1 style in this one. And I have this on 60% on normal. And you can see the kind of effect that you get. And then I use the color, a solid color, which is something I use many times in my final effects. And the color code I use is 160003. This dark red. And I set this on exclusion. And this will add even more red tones, especially on the shadows. And then I created some curves because I added too much light and I wanted to recover that. So I added some light on the shadows and then just dragged everything down a little bit. Especially here on this lighter shadows, right on that side. And next, I added a texture on top of this. I created a new layer. And the texture I used is this one over here. So let me just make it bigger. It's actually a bigger image, but like that. And I'm going to put this on screen. And I'm going to lower the opacity to 20 or 25%, something like that. And I will sharpen it just a little bit. Sharpen. Okay, now you can add more texture. Actually, I think this is even too strong. So I'm going to use some levels to darken the whole thing a little bit. And just make those scratches stand out. So I don't want the black part that much. Like that. And I think too many scratches are there. Let me just rotate it, or actually flip it horizontally. Okay, I think that looks better. And you have some more dust textures here, like for example this one. This is from a pack I created myself. You can download the whole pack from my website, resources.psdbox.com. So I'm just gonna rotate this like so, make it a little bigger, and change the blend mode to screen, and probably drop the opacity just a little bit. Now, we're almost done. I added yet another color lookup on top, and this is again from the Epic pack, which is called Epic Petrol Blue. And this is the effect that you get. And I dropped the opacity of this to 30%. And then I created the final stamp. Again, Shift Option Command E. And I went to Camera Raw. And here I just sharpened the whole thing. And I increased the clarity using, but only here on the face. So I created the filter like this. Let me reset everything. And I just increased the clarity there. And then on the overall image, I increased the sharpening, the detail. Let me just zoom in at 100% so I can see what I'm doing. Yeah, that looks better. I want to have this kind of rugged effect. And then I also increased on the effects. I added some grain. So increase the grain, maybe a little bit the size, because I'm going to have this sort of grunge effect on the whole image, and probably a little more vignette. And click OK. Now let me show you the before and after using this final touches and adjustments, because at the end you can get some really cool effects by just using effects. So this was the final manipulation, and with just a few effects we ended up with this. So I think it looks pretty cool at the end. So that's all for this tutorial. It's a little simpler than this one because I didn't add that cage, but I think it looks kind of weird with this cage. I don't know. Let me just know your opinion if you like this version better than this one. Just comment on the video below, and make sure if you create something cool, use the hashtag PSDBox, or send me better off if you send me a DM on Instagram, because I receive lots of mentions with the hashtag or with the Instagram handle, and I cannot watch all of them. If you send me a DM, I might be able to see what you're doing. So that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I hope to join me on my next tutorial.